In fact, the longest speaker election consumed 2 months in 1856 on the 133rd ballot. So 2 months, could you imagine? Oh my goodness.
You know, we should consider what's the best path forward. We do need to consider whether, if we're going to advance Mr. Trump's agenda, whether the current leadership is what we need.
A whole bunch of kids look at ads for food on Facebook, and that was $3 million worth.
Genius.
I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars to drill holes into cats' heads, spin them around rapidly, and study motion sickness.
A delay in President Trump's certification? Say it ain't so. The House has to elect a speaker, otherwise there will be some consequences. And I've got several articles here today from Fox News, Roll Call, and others saying that if there is no speaker, there will be consequences. Here is what Chad Pergram from Fox News is communicating, saying, listen, it's a problem that's been percolating for a while. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's been underground, subterranean, lurking underneath, except to those of us who are here. The issue is gurgled to the top now that we have a new Congress coming in. And here's what the background is. Congress spasmed between a staggering 1,500-page bill. We saw that. Then they cut it back down after everybody flipped out all over the internet and threw a fit. Trump supported the bill. 38 Republicans voted against the bill, and things got tense. We remember Mike Johnson was right in the middle of this. He's like, we need more money. We have to spend it because whatever. And they got more spending passed. But Johnson is not emerging from that battle unscathed. In fact, some Republicans are very upset with him. And so here is the math as it stands today. The House clocks in 434 members, 1 vacancy. Matt Gaetz left, so we're down 1. He resigned his position for this Congress a few weeks ago. Now, even though Gaetz won the next election, his resignation letter says he's not going into the next Congress. Okay, so we're down 1. So then the breakdown is 219 to 215 when the new Congress starts, coming up very soon. Now, Trump's pick for national security advisor is called Mike Waltz. He remains in the House for now, but Trump's going to pull him up eventually. So does Elise Stefanik from New York. She's going to the ambassador to the UN. Now, that's all pending, and so that might happen January, February once the Senate makes their advice and consent. Once they resign, what do the numbers look like? 217 to 214. But the speaker's election is on January 3rd, okay, before any of this happens. So the numbers will dwindle, but they'll still be higher than the 217 to 214 for a bit. But here's the question for Johnson. The Speaker of the House must win an outright majority of all members casting ballots by name. In other words, the person with the most votes does not win. It's got to be a majority. That's what happened to Kev McCarthy. Remember, Kev McCarthy was outpolling Hakeem Jeffries, but he still didn't win. It took days for McCarthy to actually get the majority, and then finally he won. So we'll come back to that, he says. But what about Mike Johnson and the math for him? He says, if there are 219 Republicans and 4 voted for someone else besides him, so anyone else, Elon Musk, for example, as Rand Paul has been contemplating, and no one attained an outright majority, we have no speaker. So the magic number then is 218 votes in order to get the majority. By rule, this paralyzes the House. Okay, we need a speaker because without one, the House absolutely unequivocally cannot do anything until it elects a speaker, period. Now, Roll Call's also talking about this, and they say maybe that's not accurate. Maybe there's this gray area where they could do something else. But as it stands, this is a possibility. The House can't swear in members. Technically, they're still representatives elect. Only after the House chooses its speaker does he or she turn in and then swear in the new membership. They can't pass any legislation, no committees. It's frozen in paralysis until we have a new speaker. So he says, all right, America, sit down for this part. Okay, we are. Now, I hope you're sitting down, says this also means that the House cannot certify the results of the Electoral College, which would make Trump the 47th president of the United States on January 6th officially. The failure to elect a speaker compels the House to vote over and over and over until it finally taps someone. Remember when we were back here with McCarthy, Kev, 15 ballots over 5 days 2 years ago, over 2 days. The House settled into a congressional cryogenic freeze for 3 weeks after the members threw out McCarthy. Members weeks were like, what's going on? It burned through 2 speaker candidates. Steve Scalise came and went. Tom Emmer came and went. Jim Jordan was contemplated, but that didn't happen. So you see the problem. What happens if this goes on again? What happens if we go through that same rigmarole? Consider for a moment that prior to the last year, the House never went to a second ballot to select a speaker. Prior to last year, never happened. Not since 1923. It took 63 ballots for them to finally pick someone in 1849. That's nothing. In fact, the longest speaker election consumed 2 months in 1856 on the 133rd ballot. So 2 months, could you imagine? Oh my goodness. 2 months, they don't actually have Trump certified. So anything which elongates this, because what happens if Republicans break and join the Democrats, and then the Democrats execute the Hill plan that we read from those insurrectionists on the opinion piece that they published yesterday, where they explained that there is still a lawful justification for rejecting ballots that are not regularly given. Remember that? And so they could then just not count the electoral ballots that came in from the red states because Trump was not regularly voted for because of insurrection in the 14th Amendment, they say. So if you cannot give it back to the Democrats because then maybe they will actually disqualify him. So if anything, this elongates into a collision with January 6th, which is the statutory day. We know January 6th is big. So will the Republicans come together and just pick Johnson to get it over with? There's no dispute Trump won the election. There's no anticipation of a repeat of J6, but a failure to certify the Electoral College on the day it's supposed to be done is playing with fire. Such a scenario, again, would be very fragile to the American electoral and political system. Now, on January 6th, they're supposed to go in to meet and tabulate the votes. Any dispute over a state's slate of electoral votes compels the House and the Senate to debate these things. And we were here when they did that with Ted Cruz, and we're trying to unpack what happened there. Then January 6th happened. Now, in the case of Kamala, she is this president of the Senate. So she comes in and announces a victor. So they're starting to control a lot of levers of power here. Now, Congress is not required to certify it on January 6th, and there is some leeway. In 2021, he says the Electoral College wasn't certified until 3:52 a.m. on January 7th, right? Because they were out of the congressional building, the Capitol, for like 4.5 hours. Great. It only became a major problem if it drags on through noon of January 20th. That's when President-elect takes the oath of office. But if it's 3 weeks of back and forth, or 2 months, like in the 1800s, that's a problem. What happens if they're not sorted by January 20th? Well, Biden's done, okay? He's done on the 20th, so he goes. Same with Harris. So next, who's in line, if they're both termed out, they're both expired, and there's no speaker because they haven't voted for the speaker, so who becomes the president? Oh my gosh, what the heck? Well, there is at the moment a president pro tem of the Senate, the most senior member of the majority party. He or she is fourth in line to the presidency. At that moment, it's a senator who's a Democrat called Patty Murray from Washington. But Republicans claim control of the chamber in early January, and unlike the House, if it's stymied over a speaker, the Senate is functioning. That means 91-year-old Senate Chuck Grassley from Iowa becomes the Senate president. He served since 1981. So if the House is still frittering away trying to elect a speaker, Chuck Grassley becomes president, which ain't bad. That's not bad. Okay, this could be a lot worse. I write likely because it's into some serious extra constitutional stuff. This is all unprecedented. Strange lands never visited in the American political experience before, but I'm down for Grassley. He's great. It all hinges on Mike Johnson, or frankly, someone else. If they can get the speaker vote and get voted into on January 3rd, we're good. Otherwise, any interregnum, like the past two speaker elections, begins establishing challenges to historical precedent. So we'll see. Unclear if the House can avoid such contretemps. It's about the math. And once again, balancing the equation is tenuous at best. Now, roll call has some more on this. They say, we actually do have some options. They say there are options. If we don't have a speaker, some things that we can do about this. They say ill will against Mike Johnson might make things difficult. In fact, as president of the Senate, Kamala Harris would be the presiding officer during a joint session of Congress when they're having to then certify the election. But now we don't know if we're going to actually have a speaker. Now, there's one big gray area. As speaker, Johnson will not have a presiding official role during J6. But what happens in the 3 days before could be crucial. The country's going through one big gray area, they say. One political science person at ASU, Arizona, said about a speaker fight that goes into J6, he says, the one precedent is clear, and it could help determine what happens after the start of a new Congress. The election of the speaker is the first thing that they do. Nothing else happens until the speaker is elected. It's happened that way since 1789. Said, and now that worked for them, so that works for us. Now, Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie said he's not voting for Johnson on the floor. Massie says, no, sorry, not going to happen. And if we start having people peel off, it's a razor-thin majority. What happens if Johnson doesn't get the votes? The House clerk presides over the speaker elections, including at the start of a new Congress. Among the early actions on January 3rd, which is according to the congressional report, the clerk will order a quorum call before the House proceeds to the floor election for speaker, and then she'll conduct that with the assistance of the tellers. But even if a speaker is not elected in time for J6, multiple congressional and legal scholars members say that they could do a clerk. If both parties agree, the clerk could potentially swear in the House members to ensure that the Constitution is followed. So they can organize themselves, and the clerk could swear people in. Now, while there's no precedent in U.S. history to guide House members through this, they do have the authority to make up precedent, as they say. And if that's necessary, one option would be if they're able to reach an agreement where they could proceed or without any speaker. Somebody from Notre Dame Law School also said the Constitution gives them the ability to organize themselves, and they could also create a joint session without a speaker. So they reached out to this guy. He's over at Loyola Marymount University. He weighed in on this. Says Levitt said the teller portion could be handled by the majority vote or unanimous consent, and any objections would be unlikely. And so maybe they could do this without a speaker. They also will typically pass concurrent resolutions and more, but under this option, the clerk would have the procedural authority in order to elect a temporary speaker. If there was political will, elect a temporary speaker just for this process and then pull them back out again. They interviewed a bunch of experts. The best option, elect somebody on the third. We'll see if the Republicans can figure it out. The biggest force that could make that happen would be political pressure. That would be especially the Republicans under tremendous pressure to select a speaker. Trump would be applying that pressure too once it became clear that they may not be coming close to this. So if Johnson cannot muster enough votes, who's coming next? Anybody who wants it, they said, is not in their right mind. Anybody who wants the job, obviously, isn't in their right mind, says a California Republican. So they're talking a lot about it. Here is how Fox News is reporting it.
The first order of business for the House when Congress convenes January 3rd is electing a House Speaker. It's all about the math. The House clocks in with 434 members with one vacancy, thanks to former Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. The breakdown is 219 Republicans to 215 Democrats. The Speaker of the House must win an outright majority of all members. Current Speaker Mike Johnson is on thin ice with the right flank of his party after last week's debacle over government spending.
Before the last couple of weeks, I was, in his corner, but now we should consider what's the best path forward. We do need to consider whether, if we're going to advance Mr. Trump's agenda, whether the current leadership is what we need.
Johnson relied on Democrats to get the final funding bill across the finish line. It's a similar scenario to 2023 when former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy worked with Democrats to keep the government open. Gaetz then triggered the vote to oust McCarthy. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries signals Democrats won't be helping Johnson.
And there will be no Democrats available to save him or the extreme MAGA Republicans from themselves based on the breaching of a bipartisan agreement.
Without a speaker, the House is paralyzed. It can't swear in members, it can't pass legislation, and here's the kicker. It cannot certify the results of the Electoral College on January 6th.
All right, so what's going to happen? Are those Republicans who are unhappy with Johnson, are they going to continue to remain unhappy with Johnson, or are they going to fall in line and get behind him because the pressure will be on massively? And if there's not someone else who's already emerged as a consensus person, you have to suspect that Johnson is going to be the path of least resistance. Now, other options are out there. Rand Paul says, the Speaker of the House doesn't need to be a member of Congress, and nothing would disrupt the swamp more than electing Elon Musk Speaker of the House. Think about it. Nothing's impossible. This is America. And not to mention the joy it's seeing the collective establishment, aka the Uniparty, lose their ever-loving minds, from Rand Paul. Now, Elon Musk is a good option. Another good option is Adam Johnson, the lectern guy, because he's got a lot of experience with lecterns, and he's a smart dude too, and handsome too. So you can see Rand Paul is clearly onto something here. If we cannot get Johnson or someone else, they all like Elon. Here was Rand Paul talking about the spending and how upset he is in the aftermath of Johnson's debacle.
I got a lot of problems with big spenders in both parties. And here's the thing, everywhere you look, you find more of this stuff. $1 trillion. That means we found a lot of waste, but it's everywhere. It's in all the big departments, in the Department of State, it's in NIH, it's in the National Science Foundation. And people wonder why.
Some of these were from the report that we covered, the Festivus report, in a prior video. Iraqi Sesame Street, 20 million. Cat experiments. Okay, these were horrible and gruesome and immoral. Cat experiments. $10 million. $2.1 million on Paraguay border security when they're selling off our wall. Pickleball. $12 million for the Department of Interior on a pickleball complex in Las Vegas. $12 million. And we saw the aerial photos of that. It looks very nice. Government employees playing pickleball. Should be on America's Funniest Home Videos. Okay. Climate action in Brazil. $3 million for girl-centered climate action in Brazil, and drag shows on ice. Just a small little $10,000 for those people. So that's what Rand Paul was uncovering. And who's paying for this? Congress is. This money is not being being approved out of thin air. Congress passes budgets and they allow this money to be spent, and we're sick of it. Here's Rand.
Does it exist every year? We have this Department of Doge. Are they going to be able to get rid of it? Well, the only way to get rid of it is to spend less money. So if you give the National Science Foundation $4 billion one year and then you increase it to $8 billion, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that you're going to get more waste, not less. This has been going on since the 70s, but it has exploded. But you have to be willing to cut spending for the overall department. NIH will have more waste if you give them more money. They spent $3 million studying what kids do when they look at ads for food on Facebook. So they had a whole bunch of kids look at ads for food on Facebook, and that was $3 million worth.
Genius.
I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars to drill holes into cats' heads, spin them around rapidly, and study motion sickness. Sounds more like animal cruelty than it actually sounds like an experiment.
Yeah,
but the list goes on and on.
And that's not to mention, I mean, you have stolen COVID relief funds, $8 million. One guy from Florida did it to buy an island. You mentioned the cat. The list does go on and on. But you also alluded to this, Senator. Do you think your tradition ends this year? In other words, is this the year that Doge eliminates the need for you to go through and make this list? Because they've done it over the course of the intervening 365 days.
Ultimately, it takes Congress. Congress has to get rid of the spending. Doge can point out the spending problems and the waste the same way I've been pointing it out. But the reason it's not eliminated is they don't have the votes to get rid of the spending. So I am very hopeful that Doge will draw attention to this the same way I've been drawing attention to it. But I'll give you an example. About a year ago, there was a chip spill, a bill to subsidize microchips, semiconductors in the United States. Well, in that bill, they doubled the size of the National Science Foundation. Now, the National Science Foundation is the one that's famous for doing a study on whether tequila or gin makes people more aggressive.
Wow.
So they fed fish, half of them tequila and the other half of the fish gin.
Wow.
And they decided which made the fish more aggressive.
Brilliant.
That's the National Science Foundation.
Good job.
Most of the terrible, wasteful projects, the crazy stuff and experiments that's going on is National Science Foundation. In the CHIPS bill, all the Democrats and half the Republicans voted to double the size of the National Science Foundation. So why is there more waste? Because the idiots in Congress keep giving them more money.
Well,
the
it will
more
be
money
interesting
they
to see
have, the
again
more money they
what
can
happens
waste.
when.
So you can clearly see that those fish alcohol experiments are being run by probably people who really enjoy alcohol. They're like, a little bit for you, a little bit for me, a little bit for you, a little bit more for me. I'm going, hey, guys, this is supposed to be a science lab, all right? What are you doing? We're doing science right now as they're hammered drunk, falling all over themselves. Well, that's Rand Paul. Shout out to Rand Paul for calling out our useless Congress. We'll see just how useless they are and whether they can pick a speaker so that, we can have President Trump running the country right on time. Not 1 minute delay.